Good afternoon and welcome back to AIEC's webinar weeks. This is our fourth and final webinar for today. However, we will start up again next Tuesday, December the 8th. So if you haven't registered for those webinars, please go out and visit aiec.coop/webinar weeks and please register for those. We look forward to having you. This last webinar will be Preservative Migration Review by Stella Jones. This presentation will last roughly 40-45 minutes. We'll leave some time at the end for some questions. We'll see how that goes. Please submit your questions to the chat function. You can direct those to AIEC utilizing the little drop-down menu, and we'll moderate those questions to our presenters today. Please keep your microphones muted unless asked otherwise. And Brian, how might our attendees acquire PE credits?
Really, I think most of the people have already let me know, most of the PEs have already let me know, but if you have not, and you would like to receive PE credits for this session or any of the other sessions you have attended, just email me at badams@aiec.coop, and I'll make sure to mark you down and get you a certificate after next week's sessions. So just shoot me an email and I'll get that to you next week. With that, I will introduce our speaker for today. His name is Dean Anderson. He's the Director of U.S. Pole Sales for Stella Jones. Dean is responsible for supporting 10 regional sales managers and managing Stella Jones's relationship with some of the largest utilities in North America. He specializes in complex programs tailored specifically to the inventory, logistics, and service needs of these customers. Prior to his current role, Dean served as product manager for Stella Jones's Southern Yellow Pine business, which grew from $5 million in sales to over $175 million in 9 years. His tenure with McFarland began in 2006 as a regional sales manager. So with that, I will hand it over to Dean.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll hop right in here. Goal this afternoon really is just to give you an understanding of what the Penta timeline is. There's a lot of different information flying around. Talk a little bit about the different alternatives that you have, primarily for distribution poles, primarily for Southern Yellow Pine, but we'll also talk about Douglas fir, both in oil-borne and water-borne treatment options. Before we dive into that, I just want to touch on a couple of points on why we're qualified to talk to you about what your options are and what direction you may want to go as you go into the future. Stella Jones is pretty unique in that we've got the highest number of treating locations across the U.S. and Canada, but we're also the only pole manufacturer in North America that treats all AWPA and ANSI approved species and treatments. We're currently treating with copper naphthenate, which is one of the products that you guys will probably end up considering for a oil-borne substitute for Penta. We're also treating with DCOI, which is also unique to the business. So from our perspective, we approach the marketplace as our job is to be the best treater that we can be for our customers, regardless of what chemical you choose to use in treating your utility poles. Most of our competitors are taking a different approach to this and approaching it from the perspective of they're going to choose a chemical. Many of them actually manufacture, or some of them manufacture those chemicals and try to drive their customers towards the chemicals that they feel are best for them. So today, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm just here to educate, be preservative agnostic. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to us if you go with copper naphthenate or DCOI or creosote or CCA. We provide all those to the marketplace today and would be happy to continue to do that. So just wanted to give you kind of that perspective because it is different. Some of the things that you hear today may or may not match what you've heard from other vendors. feel free to ask questions and ask for clarifications, particularly if you've heard something different, and I can hopefully explain what the twist is that that you may have gotten from a potential other vendor. So with that, you won't hear anything else about Stella Jones. We'll just talk about whole preservatives. So the Penta supply wind down, basically, I took out about 2 or 3 slides of the history, but the bottom line is that Cabot Labs, who owns KMG is the only producer of pentachlorophenol in the world. They're going to shut down production of Penta December 31st of 2021. So they'll be manufacturing Pentablock through the end of 2021, and all that material then will be shipped very early in 2022. All Penta has to be out of Mexico. We've always had an agreement with KMG. We're the largest user of Penta in the world. We've had an agreement with them for a long time. But because of this wind down, we've entered into sort of a modified agreement with them. There's been a number of price increases that KMG Cabot has put into place. So we've negotiated a fixed price through the end of production so that we know that we can provide it to our customers at a reasonable cost. We're going to continue to get our full allotment of Penta, possibly even a little bit more through the end of 21. And that the Matamoros plant will run at max capacity through the end of 21. Another thing that we're doing is we're installing a block dissolver in Cordele, Georgia. Basically, Penta comes in 2,000-pound blocks. They look like giant salt licks. And so in the West, when you're treating with heat, those blocks are dissolved through the treating process. In the South, you don't use heat in treating southern yellow pine, and as such, you have to use it. You have to convert that block into a concentrate. KMG will be shutting down its plant in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the end of 21 that creates that concentrate. So we're going to put together a dissolver, a block dissolver that will run basically through 22 and into 23 when our supply actually runs out. Right now today, Stella Jones has an additional 1 year plus of pentachlorophenol for treating. So in other words, if everything stopped today and we didn't get another ounce of pentachlorophenol this year or ever in the future, we could still treat through the end of 21 into 22 just based on the inventory that we already have on the ground. We have 3 different locations across the United States where we've stored up Pentablock, and as such, we'll be able to use that supply down through 2022 and likely early 2023, just depending how things play out. I don't see any questions, so we'll keep going. If you think about transitioning to a new preservative, there's roughly 2,000 customers today that are using pentachlorophenol poles across North America. All of those customers in 2021, 22, 23 are going to have to change to a different treatment. All of those customers have certain logistics today. Their poles come from a certain plant. It costs them a certain amount of money to get those poles from that plant to their location. Tomorrow, or whenever those changes happen, the plants are going to change which treatments they're treating. And that plant, if say you decide that you want to go with DCOI and that plant is going to treat creosote, well, now you're going to have to get your poles from a different plant that has logistic impacts that could have cost impacts. For large treaters like Stella Jones, we've got the challenges of which plants do we migrate when, how do we migrate our customers, how do we help our customers plan for a migration. I can't transition a plant just part way for the most part. There's some exceptions, but for the most part, I can't just partially transition. I need to transition that whole plant, or at least that portion of the plant, the retort or the treating vessel. So for us, there's a lot of transitions that we have to take into account. If I was a smaller manufacturer that only had 1 plant or 2 plants, it gets even tougher for them because they have to choose a chemical, number one, and if all of their customers don't choose that same chemical, it can have impacts to their business. But also trying to transition when you have fewer ways to compensate for those changes in the marketplace could have an impact to supply for some of the smaller manufacturers. So those are just things to take into account. And obviously this process is going to look differently depending upon what direction customers go. If everybody decides that creosote's the way to go, that's going to make it pretty simple. Everybody's got to convert their plants over to creosote. Alternatively, if some people want to go DCOI and some people want to go creosote and some people want to go CCA, well, now my one penta plant needs to become 3 different treatments. And or I have to have a plant for each one of those treatments and then rearrange my customers from a logistical standpoint to match that. So somewhere in the middle is probably what will happen in reality. And in some places that'll probably get a little bit uncomfortable. But the opportunities are there that if we work together as an industry to make those transitions orderly, we should be able to take care of customers and provide them with what they want as long as they want it. So what we're recommending to our customers, and I know we've got a few of our customers on the phone here today. We want to say thank you for joining us. But our ask of our customers basically is to plan to stay with Penta until the supply is depleted. So basically stay with Penta through the end of 22 and be ready to switch as the plants migrate. In the meantime, evaluate the other options. CCA should be on this list, QNAP, DCY, Creo, and CCA. Over the next 3 to 9 months, decide what direction you're going to go, do your research, ask your questions, utilize us. We can put you in contact with the different chemical manufacturers. We can get you any information you want. We can sell you sample polls. We've got a lot of different options to help you with those decisions. Make your decision. Decide what you're going to go to at the end of Penta so that that information can be communicated to us or to your poll vendor, and they can take that into account as they're doing their planning. Honestly, for some of the smaller treaters, it'll actually help them make decisions about what direction they're going to go with their treatment because they are going to have to kind of pick a horse and ride it to a certain extent. And like I said, we're more than willing to help you with any questions or evaluation points. I don't see any questions. Keep going. So basically all wood pole preservatives fall into 2 different buckets. One is a waterborne preservative system and the other is an oil-borne preservative system. Waterborne obviously is different because the carrier is different, but the idea with a waterborne preservative is that you're going to introduce the chemical into the wood pole within water. The water will over time evaporate, move out of the pole, and the chemical will actually fixate to the wood. It will actually stay in one place for the life of that pole, be immobilized. Oil-borne, on the other hand, the oil and the chemical work together in partnership to preserve the pole. So one of the challenges with waterborne preservatives, you may have some issues in the winter with freezing. There are things that we can do as a treater to help mitigate that. We'll talk about that in future slides here. There's plenty of utilities in the Northeast that use CCA in spite of the cold climates. In the Midwest through Ohio and Pennsylvania, First Energy was a large user of CCA. They've gone back to Penta. It just really depends. Different utilities make do with different things. Different utilities prefer different things. CCA does tend to be the least cost preservative in the marketplace. A lot of that is because you're not using the oil, and oil is expensive. It's also a little bit more volatile. So costs do tend to be lower on the CCA-based poles. One thing to note is it can't be used on Douglas fir. So if you guys buy any transmission poles or utilize Douglas fir for those, CCA or waterborne option are not an option for Douglas fir. Basically, the cell size in Douglas fir is smaller and therefore the larger molecule that you get with a CCA just does not penetrate the wood properly. As far as disposal, waterborne preservatives, basically you've got two options. You can either reuse them as something else like a fence post or a parking lot bumper, or you can dispose of them in a landfill. One thing that not everybody is aware of is that CCA can be disposed of in a lined landfill based on an exemption. It's a government exemption that allows CCA to be disposed of in a landfill even though it doesn't pass the regulations for what can be disposed of in a landfill. That exemption will probably never go anywhere because it'll stay in force forever. If for some reason it didn't, it basically would render CCA poles as hazardous waste. Again, no reason to think that that would change because the implications to disposing of all that material, there's not another way to really deal with all of that that's out there. But waterborne preservative systems in general use copper, and because of that, they cannot be burned. So the only waterborne, there's the waterborne treatment that most people would be considering is CCA, CCAET. Some real good performance on CCA. It's got a good history of performing well over time. It's unique in that it comes to the marketplace with a 50-year limited warranty. It's a prorated warranty. The warranty is administered by the chemical manufacturer, not the treater itself. So if you had a pole that fell over at year 47 and you felt like you'd done all the right things to it while it was in service, you would go to the treater. The treater would say, I buy my CCA from this company, and you'd go to that company and they would pay you for the last 3 years of that pole's prorated life. If it happens earlier, obviously the warranty has more value. One of the challenges with CCA, especially in areas where linemen do a lot of climbing, is that it's hard. As the moisture comes out of the pole, as that water evaporates and the pole equalizes with the relative humidity around it, the poles get very hard. So you're using things like titanium gaffs. You have a little bit more challenge. It was a big part of, honestly, why First Energy went away from CCA, was just because the linemen just wouldn't make that transition from an oil-borne preservative like Penta over to CCA because of the hardness and some of those issues. There is a ET additive, so CCA ET, which is an emulsified treatment or an extra treatment. It's an emulsified oil that's used to soften the outer inch of the pole to make it easier for climbing. Depending who you talk to, some people think that works really well, and it stays in the wood for an extended period of time. Others seem to think that it dries out. I think some of that has to do with climate and the area that it's used. But in general, ET does provide a better climbing experience for the lineman, which makes it safer. Comes with the same 50-year warranty. CCA poles tend to be heavier than Penta poles by comparison. They're especially quite a bit heavier when they're newly treated. So a CCA pole that was treated 2 or 3 months ago could weigh as much as 60 pounds per cubic foot, whereas a Penta pole be 48 to 50 pounds per cubic foot. So it's a significant difference. You do see some increased breakage with CCA in the winter. If it's a newly treated pole and it's moved north quickly, they have a tendency to freeze, which makes them a little bit tougher to handle. They can break when they're being handled or moved about. That's something else to consider. Again, many utilities deal with those issues. It's not insurmountable. CCA is an acceptable and a good performing preservative in the north. You can't burn it, so there are no cogen options. You can't burn it because of the heavy metals. So CCA is copper, chromium, and arsenic. All three of those things are heavy metals that don't break down. They're not real good for the environment, so you can't burn those. One of the things that we do to help with the hardness, the weight, and the brittleness in the winter is to build poles in advance and hold them at southern plants so that they can dry out in the winter months before they actually get delivered to the customer. That does seem to help. The challenge always becomes is you can't build 4 months worth of inventory at the beginning and know exactly what you're going to use. Or if you get an ice storm and you're getting freshly treated material coming up, the chances of it freezing are higher. Some of those sorts of things. So you can deal with it, you can make some adjustments, but it's just something that you have to deal with and account for as you look at your processes. And really the payoff is that you've got a lower cost, you've got that prorated warranty, and you've got a good performing pole. Any questions for CCA or waterborne before we move on? I don't see anything in the chat. I'm going to keep going. So oil-borne preservatives, as the name suggests, they're going to be introduced into the wood via an oil. And the oil and the carrier, as it were, and the chemical work together as a treatment system. So the preservative, penta in this case, or copper nanthanate or DCOI, stays basically in solution even though it's between the cells in the pole. So over time, if you're using penta today, you'll know that as the pole is out in the field over an extended period of time, the top will start to get drier and you can actually see the treatment migrate down the pole over the life of the pole. And that helps protect the ground line, which is the most the point of the pole that's most susceptible to damage or attack by insects or rot, those sorts of things. The oil in the pole helps the pole remain softer, so it's a little bit better for climbing. Some people, there's a lot of folks in the plains states that really say that penta compared to CCA in a high load situation performs better. I've heard stories of REAs that have put in CCA lines, they had penta lines, they had an ice storm come through, the penta line stayed up and the CCA line went down, and so therefore penta is better. I don't know if I necessarily buy into that. There's a lot of factors in an ice storm, the direction of the wind, all those sorts of things. But bottom line is the penta does, or the oil-borne does keep those poles a little bit more supple than a waterborne. From a reuse or from an end-of-life use for oil-borne, generally some products can be incinerated or used as cogen. They can all go into a landfill. There's no exemption required for those. And then, of course, they can always be reused for something else. So the first alternative to penta that we'll talk about is creosote. If some of you guys have been around for a long time, you may have used creosote in the past. In general, you don't see it much north of Oklahoma or Texas anymore. It's the same preservative that's used with railroad ties. It's not limited by species. It's more of a black pole than a brown pole. It can be used as a fuel, performs extremely well. It's very durable. They love it in Texas where you've got big open areas with lots of heat. It adheres to the pole very, very well. Really a very, very good chemical, well proven. Downsides with it, it's a restricted use pesticide, so you do have to have, in order to treat with it or do anything with it, you've got to be licensed. That just puts a lot of restriction on the treater, as most of these chemicals do. But you can't go buy a bucket of creosote at Home Depot and use it on wood, or you can't use it for your field dressing if you drill holes in the field, that sort of thing. It's restricted use. One of the biggest things with creosote is its odor. It has a very strong petroleum smell. You generally find people that either like it or hate it. I like the smell of creosote. I've always liked the smell of the railroad ties sort of thing. But it can be a source of customer complaints. It causes sensitivity in the skin. So you do end up with worker exposure issues if people aren't wearing the proper PPE, or if little Johnny rubs up against a new pole in the yard, he's going to get some sort of a dermal burn or issue with the skin. So it's definitely something that you have to be aware of. It's definitely something that you will deal with if you go to creosote. High side is it's going to work real well. The poles are going to last a long time. There's been a lot of advances made in the treating of creosote. You can tell from looking at the poles in this picture that the poles are dry. It's not that wet, gooey sort of, 1960s, 70s sort of creosote pole. Back in the 70s and 80s, you'd buy a creosote pole and you'd judge how good it was based by how much extra creo there was around the bottom 2 years into it, right? And that would, oh, I got my money out of that one. I got a lot of creosote in it. Today, customers, you guys demand a dry pole. You don't want to have to deal with customer complaints about chemicals around the base of the pole or runoff, those sorts of things. So a lot of advances have been made in treating with creosote that allows you to actually get a dry pole at the point of use. You guys are a quiet bunch. I don't think I've gone this far without a question before. Copper naphthenate is the next option for you. Copper naphthenate honestly has a bit of a checkered past. That doesn't mean it's not a good chemical. It just means that when it first came to market, there was a number of challenges related to this product. If you do a web search on copper naphthenate, the first 5 or 6 things that pop up are all related to lawsuits related to effectiveness or early failures with copper naphthenate. Most of that happened in the 80s when the chemical first came out. When it was first approved for use by AWPA, there were multiple chemical manufacturers that were creating copper naphthenate. And a couple of them honestly just weren't very good at it, and they're not in the business anymore. Today there's only one manufacturer of copper naphthenate. The product, we've learned a lot about the product since it came out in the 80s. It's a little bit different in that even in southern yellow pine, where typically you would not treat with heat, you're just going to treat at ambient temperature. Copper naphthenate really likes to be at about 90 to 100 degrees. It performs better, it penetrates better. It deals with a lot of things better when it's a little bit warm. So it's a little bit different from a treating perspective in that I have to have heat. I've got to have a little bit different equipment to do it. The other thing about copper naphthenate is that it doesn't like water in the process. So if you think about a wood pole, especially a southern yellow pine pole, poles are fiber and they're water. And so that's really what you have when you have a tree that's going to get treated. And so there's 2 parts of the process. The first part of the process is conditioning it, it's drying it, it's taking the moisture out of the tree. We do that in a kiln. And that process actually involves moisture, but it gets the majority of the moisture out of the tree so that it's ready to become a pole. And you'll take as much as 65, 70, 75% of the moisture out of that tree during that kiln drying process. But there's still sugars, there's still water in that tree, in that pole as it's getting treated. And that mixes with the solution. That's just part of the nature of the beast when you're treating poles. Part of treating a pole properly is to also be able to deal with water and separate it out of your system, assuming you're in an oil-borne treatment, obviously, and keeping that solution as water-free as possible. If you don't do that with copper naphthenate, you have problems with treating quality and consistency. So as long as a treater is able to do that, we've been treating with copper naphthenate for decades, mostly Douglas fir, but there is some southern yellow pine copper naphthenate out there. We've got a plant in Oregon where we have a resource dedicated to copper naphthenate treating. And then we've got the capability of doing it in Alabama for southern yellow pine. So odor is a big one for copper naphthenate. Copper naphthenate, the naphthenic acid, it has a smell very similar to mothballs, and it's strong. It tends to get worse as the pole gets wet. It dissipates, excuse me, a little bit over time, but you'll still get a whiff of it as it gets wet. That seems to be a bit of an issue. Up in the Pacific Northwest here, there's some areas where penta is not allowed based on city or county rules. So the city of Seattle, for instance, uses copper naphthenate because they're not allowed to use penta. And what they actually do is they have a whole odor mitigation process where they actually have a water truck. They get some, basically, it's an industrial amounts to, and they spray that on their poles. They spray that on the yard where they store the poles, and that helps keep the odor down. It helps with limiting some of the customer complaints. But they have a number of people that all they do is deal with call outs for odor complaints for poles after they get put in service. So it is a challenge. Haven't really found anybody that likes the smell of QNAP. At least a few of us like the smell of creosote, but it's something to be aware of. Nisus, the chemical manufacturer for QNAP, they have come out with what they call a low odor formulation. That's not being used anywhere to my knowledge yet. Actually, I take that back. There's a post manufacturer in North Dakota that's using it. We have not adopted it for a couple of reasons. One, we haven't had the resources or time to fully assess the treatment or the preservative. They've made some changes in how they manufacture it in order to try to take some of that odor out, and it's unclear whether or not that'll have any impacts on efficacy. The manufacturer claims that it won't. From our perspective, we always try to do our own testing and really get comfortable with that before we put it into production. The other issue that we have is we don't have the capability of treating with two different types of formulations. And so for us, well, actually for anybody, because there's only two places that you can produce QNAP today from a pole perspective, we just don't have an option to run two systems. So if we change it for one, we have to get all of our customers to agree to change to that new formulation. And until we can assure them that we believe it's the right choice and that it's worth the additional cost, we just aren't at the point to make that decision to move forward yet. And honestly, our customers haven't demanded us to do it. There is still an odor to the low odor formula. It's unclear how that'll perform in the field. But you should at least be aware that it's out there. All right, somebody's gonna have to throw me a bone and ask a question pretty soon. We're gonna be done really early. DCOI. So you guys may or may not have heard of DCOI. DCOI was approved for use in wood utility poles within the last couple of years here. It was added to AWPA's approved list. DCOI has been around for a long time, but it was never, the company that manufactures it never really tried to use it for wood poles because honestly it was quite a bit more expensive. With the price increases in penta and now the fact that copper naphthenate is more expensive than penta, DCOI is actually very competitive with the other options that you have from an oil-borne perspective. So it's in the marketplace now. We're treating with it in Washington State, in Arlington, Washington, at one of our plants. We're doing it on sort of a rotation basis at this point. We have a number of customers that are evaluating it, that have sort of stated that that's the direction they're going to go for their Douglas fir programs, but they want to use penta until penta is out. So we, about every 3 months or so, we'll do runs of DCOI for the customers that want it, and then we'll go back to penta. As the market demand picks up, we'll just leave that retort on DCOI and then continue to expand that if it's required. There's really no odor to DCOI. If you walk up to a pole that was just treated, all you're going to smell is the oil. So depending upon what kind of oil was used in the treating process, in the South, it's a lot of diesel derivatives, so you'll smell that sort of smell to it. But the chemical itself is odor-free. They look just like penta-treated poles, so if you stand them both up, your customers aren't going to notice a difference. It's not like, why are those green with CCA or why are they black with creosote? they're going to look very similar to what you're already using. DCOI has a 50-year replacement warranty. So it's a little bit different than CCA's warranty in that if it fails at year 47 and you can document everything that the chemical manufacturer requires you to, you get a new pole free of charge. So that's a nice feature. That's something that's gotten some attention. Again, that is administered by the chemical company, not by the wood treater itself. It's a general use pesticide. I didn't mention that about copper naphthenate, but that's an important point about copper naphthenate as well. It's a general use, so you don't have to have a applicator's license to use it. You can get it, QNAP you can get in buckets, and that's probably what you're using for field treatment when necessary today is probably some sort of a QNAP-based product. DCOI, they're not planning to package that way, so you won't be able to get a bucket of DCOI per se, but it is still a general use pesticide. The EPA is not given the formal approval to use it as a cogen fuel, which is similar to what creosote. You can use creosote as a cogen fuel, but all the tests have been done. There's no output from burning DCOI that would lead to believe that there would be any reason not that the EPA wouldn't approve it for cogen. One of the things that is a little bit unique about DCOI is that it's literally all around you. It's used in a lot of different products. Chances are that 80% of you, the room that you're sitting in, has DCOI in the paint on the walls, or it's impregnated in the drywall that was used to build your house if your house is newer. It's used in a lot of different products. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing that is pretty unique about DCOI is that because it's been around and been used in other products, it's also been used in residential lumber. There is a tremendous amount of test data available. So DCOI was approved for treating residential lumber almost, well, over 20 years ago, I think. But the testing process of testing it against penta, testing it against other copper-based preservatives for dimensional lumber started years and years and years ago. And so there's actually, when they applied, there's 28 years of stake testing data that went to the AWPA to support the whole process of getting it approved for use in wood poles. So there's never been that much data available on a new chemical that's come to market. When QNAP came to market, which was the last preservative that was approved for AWPA for poles, it had 4 to 5 years of data and a lot of promises from the manufacturers that were bringing it to market on why it was better than penta, but it didn't have anywhere near the amount of data that DCOI does. Another thing that was unique about DCOI, AWPA, you're basically coming for approval in front of your peers, your competitors, and your customers. And so DCOI was 100% approved for use in wood poles. Nobody voted against it, even with competitors and whatnot there on the board. So it's a good product. It's got a long history, and it's got some good data behind it to demonstrate that. I'm going to give you a little bit more info on DCOI because the chances of you guys having heard of it is a lot lower than creosote or something like that. DCOI stands for 4,5-dichloro-2-N-octyl-4-isothiazolin 3,1. So it just rolls right off the tongue. But it's organic. They refer to it as DCOI because they don't want to say what I just had to try to say. But it is organic. There's no heavy metals, no copper, no furans, no dioxins, none of the things that people don't like about penta, none of the things that people don't like about QNAP or CCA. It's oil-borne, so it's easy to climb. It's going to migrate just like penta does. It's going to have all the same characteristics as penta from a usability perspective. It's broad spectrum, and all that means is that CCA, you've got multiple components. Penta, you've got multiple components, and each one of them is fighting off a certain point of attack. DCOI kind of handles the whole spectrum. So in CCA, you've got copper, chromium, and arsenic, and each one of them is fending off a different attack. DCOI, it's broad spectrum. You don't have to have those multiple things. Todd, it's the first new one in a while. Now, there's a couple of manufacturers that are out there that have decided that they don't want to support DCOI as an option for their customers. And one of the things that they're asserting is that DCOI will burn the user if it makes contact with the skin. There's only a little bit of truth in that, not that it'll burn the skin, but that there is a component of DCOI, the isothiazoline, that is a skin sensitizer. So if I had a little cup of that and I put my finger in it, I would get a burn. I would have a reaction to it. The treating formula that we use is manufactured by a company called Viance. That formulation was submitted to the EPA for licensing. You have to get a label before you can use your chemical anywhere. So it has to go through the EPA. The EPA tests for skin sensitivity. It tests for all these different sorts of worker exposure, customer or resident, or consumer exposure, all of those sorts of things. There is a polymer within Viance's formulation that protects the skin from the sensitizers that are in DCOI. It's undergone a ton of testing. The EPA would never have given it a general use pesticide label if there was any risk for dermal issues. And so if somebody brings that up to you and says, oh, geez, don't look at DCOI, it'll burn you, you can now tell them that DCOI won't burn you, that the issue is the isothiazoline, I almost did it, and you can be well educated in that regard and surprise them a little bit. But there is some false information flying around as it relates to that, and I can tell you in the plants where we have it, we've had zero issues from a worker exposure perspective. DCOI, as I mentioned, it's used in paints and different coatings. You guys are in the Midwest, you probably buy Southern Yellow Pine treated wood. If you have a Lowe's store close to you anywhere, it's sold for residential uses under the brand Eco-Life. I don't know if it's sold in all Lowe's stores or just certain parts of the East, but it's been out there for 12, 13 years, used for residential use, so decks, fences, playgrounds, that sort of thing. Safe for kids to have exposure to, unlike CCA or creosote or penta. It's used as an active ingredient in algicides, so in cooling towers, those sorts of things. It's impregnated into drywall, fishing nets. And then one of the big things that DCOI really got some traction in the environmental area was in '96. They had a challenge where the government put on a contest, basically. And they came to market with a DCOI impregnated paint for hulls of ships. And if you guys are familiar with boats at all, like on the Great Lakes or on the ocean, they will paint the bottoms of big ships or larger boats with anti-fouling paint. And basically what that paint is or was is paint that's got copper in it. The organism attaches to the paint. At some point it consumes the copper, it dies, and it falls off the bottom of the boat. That's awesome. It keeps the boats moving and all that, but the copper builds up in the harbors and starts to kill off the marine life. And so in the 80s and 90s, this began to be quite a problem in a lot of the port cities. And so DCOI was awarded a Green Chemistry Award as a replacement to copper-based hull paint. And there, you can still buy copper hull paint, I believe, but DCOI has made a lot of inroads, especially in more environmentally sensitive areas. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what stake tests are, but basically the idea behind stake tests is you take, as for however many years, whatever your test is. So if I want to test for 30 years and I want to take a stake reading every 2 years, I'd have 15 sets of stakes. If I want to go for 50 years and I test every year, I want 50 sets of stakes. You get the point. Basically, they make small stakes. I'll show you pictures here in a second that are tested, looked at to make sure they're similar density, all similar characteristics among all the stakes, so that it's a fair test. What they did in this case was they were comparing penta at what we would call full concentration, so 0.4 pounds per cubic foot. You guys are probably buying 0.38 or 0.45, depending upon what you spec. So right in that area, the 0.4, and then DCOI at half of that. So they ran penta at 0.2 and 0.4 pounds per cubic foot, and DCOI at 0.1 and 0.2 pounds per cubic foot. And they put those stakes in the ground into these swampy, hot, nasty areas in very high decay zones in Mississippi. These areas have active termite colonies. They literally are fenced off and protected so that the termites are not interfered with by anything else. The termites are a big part of the test. So those tests happen, and then every year or every 2 years, whatever the test requires, they'll pull those stakes and they'll look at them for signs of decay. Excuse me. So the graph on the left just basically kind of gives you a rundown of the results. And then on the right, we've got some pictures. So on the right, you can see the top pictures are for DCOI at 0.2 pounds per cubic foot. The bottom is penta at 0.39 per cubic foot. On the right-hand side, this is what the stake would have looked like at the beginning. And then this is what the stake looked like when it was pulled at 28 years. So you can see that both for 28 years, Southern Yellow Pine has virtually no protective quality to it at all. So, you know, you can take a piece of Western red cedar and put it in the ground and it won't rot for a number of years just because it has a lot of natural defenses against rot and bugs. Southern Yellow Pine has zero natural defenses. They're basically, Southern Yellow Pine is basically a sugar cube, and sugar melts and sugar is yummy for bugs. So they use Southern Yellow Pine for all their tests. So you can see here that both have actually done pretty well. They've hung in there for quite a while. The DCOI has performed a little bit better than the penta. What you can see around the outside is this ragged edge. And basically what that is that's where the termites have been testing it, or taking nibblings, they call it. Basically, termites are a little bit heartless, and they're a little bit mean. And so what they do is they take the low guy on the totem pole, and they send them out to sample wood that could be potential feed for the termites. If that guy comes back and dies, then they don't go where they sent him. They know that that's not a good food source. If he lives, then they'll go and attack it. So in this case, you can see that there's been more nibblings on the penna and quite a bit less on the DCOI. The DCOI is seemed to have repelled those nibblings a lot more effectively. If you look over on the left at this graph, the black line here is basically an untreated stake. So if I just take that piece of Southern Yellow Pine, I don't treat it, I don't do anything to it, I just pound it into the ground and leave it, basically at the end of 4 years, it doesn't exist anymore. The termites, the moisture, the heat will have taken it out. The red and blue lines, the blue is DCOI, the red is penta. Basically a decay rating of 8, just to give you an idea. A decay rating of 8 is considered basically still a new pole. It would essentially be full strength. It hasn't been compromised at all. There's just been some nibblings or whatever, some evidence of attack, but no impact to strength. So basically what this would show is that at about 12 or 13 years, a penna pole, properly seasoned, properly treated, should still be roughly the full strength of what it was when it was originally treated. DCOI pole for roughly the same, it's half the chemical, but it's the same strength, or supposedly the same toxicity, would last out into that 22, 24, 23 years without any measurable decay or significant loss of strength. Once you get past the first 8 years or so, the lines are actually pretty parallel. They degrade at a very similar pace. Just a DCOI starts at a higher level and degrades, but it degrades at about the same pace once you get to 8 to 10 years. So what this tells you is that DCOI in this test environment, in a controlled environment, and this was a government thing, this is done by EPRI, perform very, very well against Penta, certainly as well as Penta. Viance would say that Viance is a chemical manufacturer for DCOI. They would say it's at least twice as good, but you can determine what you want to call it from the graph that you see in front of the pictures. So I've got 2 quick comparison tables. So if you've got questions, please submit them. We've still got 10 minutes left. Basically, this is just a general comparison of Penta to the other 5 chemicals that we went through. I apologize. I just noticed that the CCA here, this should say Southern Yellow Pine and Western Red Cedar, not all, cannot be used in Douglas Fir. And basically, they're all pretty much easy to climb, with the exception of CCA. Odor's an issue in Penta, creosote, and QNAP, not in DCOI or CCA. The special handling that we're referring to here is really dealing with the freezing in the winter, moving the poles when it's cold, dealing with some of that brittleness. You could say that there's special handling precautions for creosote and that you need to have the right PPE. You could say the same thing for Penta. But what we're trying to get at there is just that issue with winter handling, if you will. No warranty on creosote or QNAP, 50-year on DCOI and CCA. From an environmental perspective, DCOI and QNAP are the general use pesticides. They're not restricted use. Again, the biggest difference there, it just gives you an indication that the EPA doesn't look at them as being bad to humans, or the contact's not as big of a deal. There are no heavy metals in the pentacreosote DCOI. There are in QNAP and CCA. Dioxins and furans are only in Penta. That's really why people are having Penta go away, or why the Stockholm Agreement made it go away. Residential DCOI is the only one that's used in residential applications, at least in manufactured products. So as I mentioned, you could go into Home Depot and buy a stain that may have copper naphthenate in it. But as far as buying copper naphthenated treated wood for building a deck or whatnot, that's not something that's available in the marketplace. From a disposal perspective, you've got some options for incineration or using it as fuel for creosote and DCOI that you don't have for the copper-based products. So that's what I have for you guys. We can take questions if they're out there. Joyce, yes, we'll get you a copy of the presentation. No problem. Steve will take care of that for you.
Also, Joyce, we will be making these available digitally. Hopefully within the next week or so. Ashley will be sending out links, so we are recording these, and we'll make them available to you.
All right, Dean, we did have a couple other questions come in. The first one, where does RUS stand on the use of DCOI to treat wood poles?
Good question. So when DCOI first came out this summer, there was a flurry that RUS wasn't going to approve it. And then the only 2 wood crossarm manufacturers came out and said that they were moving to DCOI. They're not even waiting until Penta is out. They're going to make that move this year. So that came out, and there was some letter writing campaigns that some distributors, some REAs, some REA associations actually wrote letters to RUS and said, this is a decision that we need to be able to make. If you take DCOI off the table, that means that the only 2 options I have are creosote and copper naphthenate. both of which have odor implications, both of which have impacts to our constituents. And you're really taking a viable option with more data than any other chemical that's come to market, and you're taking it away from us for no reason other than the fact that RUS got burned when QNAP came out and they were afraid of being burned again. And so basically since that point, there's been a lot of conversations. I have seen in writing from an RUS email address that they will be accepting DCOI, that if there's an RUS member or borrower that wants to purchase DCOI poles now for the sake of testing or evaluating, all they have to do is send in the letter asking for for it to be approved. They'll get a quick approval on that, and the next time that the RUS specs or requirements or whatever are released, supposedly DCOI is going to be on the list of accepted preservatives. We have asked RUS for clarification. We've had customers contact RUS. I urge you to contact RUS. But that's my understanding as of now, is that the next time things are issued out, it'll be on that list. In the meantime, you can get a variance to purchase it if you want to. So I don't think there's going to be an issue with RUS. I think there's enough of a push and there's enough people that are looking at DCOI as the best option. The warranty is very attractive, especially for REAs, because as you guys know, resources can be very tight, and having that backup as you make this big decision of where to go after Penta is helping people feel comfortable. So I think that's what's going to happen with RUS.
Thank you, Dean. I feel like you might have just touched on the answer to the next question as well, but I'll pose it to you anyways. Where do you see the market leaning? What preservative are companies and REAs choosing at the moment?
I think there's some regional variances that I'm seeing. So as you move further south, creosote is coming up in conversation quite a bit. When you get down into Oklahoma, even into Kansas a little bit. I've talked to a couple of REAs in Missouri that are interested in going to creosote. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of benefits to creosote. The DCOI is definitely getting some legs. I think that, fortunately or unfortunately, people are afraid of copper naphthenate just because of what happened when it first came out, and because there was a couple of bad players in the marketplace at the time. And of course, the odor issue is a very real thing. We have, I'll be honest, we have a couple of customers that buy copper naphthenate today that are excited about DCOI because they're not going to have to deal with the odor. That being said, I have copper naphthenate customers that are dedicated to it and won't switch ever. So as you move further north, I think CCA just gets a little bit to be more of a tougher sell. CCA doesn't play very well in areas where you have frequent burning, or if you burn ditches along cornfields, that sort of stuff. It'll smolder for long periods of time. You can lose lines with it. So that's an area where CCA doesn't work quite as well. But certainly, as you move further south, CCA gets a little bit more traction. So, I'm not sure how it'll all shake out. I do think that DCOI in the Midwest, and certainly in the upper Midwest, is the leader. There's a number of very large utilities that I work with that haven't made formal announcements, but that are leaning that direction. So there's a couple other ones that are looking at creosote as well. So, there's a number of different ways it could go, but largely I think from an REA perspective, DCOI seems to be a front runner. Tim's got a question there. Would you review the early chart regarding your recommendation for future pole purchasing and spec changes with DCOI as the preferred treatment? Early chart. Is this a chart you mean, Tim? Tim, can you just take, we're almost out of time, so maybe just take yourself off mute and just ask me that question. if you can. Recommendation for purchase, spec changes. Nope, there he goes. Go ahead, Tim.
Sorry.
Can't hear him. Shoot, maybe you can type it, Tim. We can't hear you. I see you took yourself off mute, but we can't hear you.
Tim's with Adams. I can get with him afterwards and find out exactly what he's needing and get it to him.
Okay.
Yeah, he just said he has no mic, so yeah.
Oh, yeah,
If
yeah.
Steve can touch base with him, that, yeah, we can get that clarified, hopefully.
No problem. Well, I think we made it inside of our hour, unless there's any questions that'll take us over.
Oh, he typed something else. First chart showing future purchase.
Future purchase. I'm not sure what. I don't think I have any charts up here, right? Future purchase. Oh, transition chart. This one?
I'm guessing that's the one.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so recommend. Okay, now I got it. So recommendation for future pole purchasing and spec changes. So DCOI, similar to Penta, has its specified retentions, and I apologize. I'm blanking. I think it's 0.13 and 0.2 or something like that for DCOI. Really, the only thing you would need to change in your specification would just be to call out DCOI as an approved treatment at that level. Everything else would remain the same. You're going to treat it at the same moisture level. You're going to, it looks Axe, other than the fact that you don't have as much smell. I didn't really cover this, but Penta actually doesn't smell either. Penta doesn't have any odor. But Penta will not stay in suspension on its own. You have to have a co-solvent to keep Penta in suspension in the treating solution. And so because of that, it's the co-solvent that makes the Pentapole stink. It's not the Penta itself, but you can't have one without the other. So anyway, for whatever that little tidbit's worth. But that's really the only change you'd have to make, Tim, is just to add DCOI as an accepted chemical and with the appropriate retention. Sorry, I was a little bit dense on your question there. The chart threw me off. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Dean. I think we're coming up on our time limit here, maybe a little bit over. I think we'll pull this webinar to a close here. Dean, we want to thank you very much. Very informative. We appreciate your time today. We appreciate the presentation. So thank you very, very much for that. For those of you that are with us still, look forward to next Tuesday's December the 8th next webinar series. We'll have a series of 4 webinars. If you would like to register for those, again, that is at aiec.coop/webinar weeks. Please go out and register. And until then, thank you all so much for attending today. And we hope you enjoy your evening.
Thanks for your time, everybody.